20 years ago today, on the 16th of September 2003, the gaming world was introduced to what had the potential to be the greatest Star Wars game ever made, Star Wars Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy. But was that game everything it was hoped for, and does it stand up today? Hello there, welcome to saberduelgaming, where we always take the high ground, and welcome to our retro review of Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy. Okay, so before we even start reviewing this game, or even looking too much into it, I suppose it's important to clarify why I felt and still feel this game had the potential to be the best Star Wars game of all time. Well, in order to answer that, I suppose we have to think about Star Wars games before it, and Star Wars games in general. Star Wars games have always tried to cover a wide range of things. There's so much within Star Wars. There's the space fights, the ground battles, the lightsaber duels, the blaster rifles, the stormtroopers, the Jedi, the rebels. There's so many different aspects to it that it's impossible to create one game that has everything. So instead, most games tried to focus on one aspect, one era, and do that as best they can. Games such as Episode 1 Racer are fantastic if you happen to like racing games. If you don't, or if you really didn't like that scene from the film or that film in general, you ain't going to enjoy the game no matter how good it is. Games such as Rogue Squadron focused on the space combat, and again, if you like that type of game, that's going to be brilliant for you, but if you don't, or if your main love in Star Wars is picking up a lightsaber, you're really not going to get too much from those games. What about the eras? Well, if your love for Star Wars stops and starts with the prequel trilogy or the original trilogy, or yes, it does happen, the sequel trilogy, then there's a lot of games that aren't going to really work for you because they don't take place in the time period or have access to the characters that you're going to love. So, what did Jedi Knight Jedi Academy do differently? Well, first of all, this takes place after the original trilogy, so you're going to get to see some original content and storylines that you wouldn't otherwise see. However, it does very much fit the feel of the original trilogy. We do get to see Luke Skywalker and other characters from the original trilogy. We get to see species and planets from that trilogy, but because this film was made after Episode 1 had been released, we also see some things and species that we only saw after the original trilogy. We get to see dual lightsaber wielding, we get to see double-bladed lightsabers, we get to see species such as the Zabrak, otherwise known as Darth Maul for those of you who are fans of the original trilogy. So, it sort of ticks all the boxes from the different eras, but what about game style? Well, there is clearly a lot of lightsaber combat in this, but you can also choose to wield the Force, develop your Force skills. You can choose to use blasters and other weapons that you see throughout the game, so there's a fair bit of variety. There isn't really any space combat in the game, but you do get to use some vehicles such as speeders and also riding a tauntaun. And on top of that, you do get to see some of the ships in fantastic cutscenes in space, so there's a little bit of that for you there anyway. We play the game as an original character named Jaden Core. It really helps that this is an original character because we're going to get to customize this character completely. We get to pick the species from humans, Zabrak, Rodent, Twi'lek and others. You pick the sex, male or female, and then you can pick hair and skin colours. You can customise their clothing as well, which is a great deal of fun, and unfortunately once this is in place you can't change it again, but still, it's interesting. You can, once customised, all the different features, and there is a number of different facial features for each species and sex. You then move on to creating your lightsaber, which is just the awesome part. You have a variety of hilts to change through, and while you can't change the hilts themselves, you pick which hilt you want, and then pick the blade colour, and let's be honest, this is everyone's favourite part. The customization doesn't stop, as later on into the game, you can choose to stick with one single lightsaber, or move on to two dual lightsabers, or even a double-bladed lightsaber, and let's be honest, who's going to stick with one lightsaber when you can carry two or go full Darth Maul? Overall, this leaves you with a whole range of looks for your own custom Jedi before you even begin the game, which is really quite good. Storyline wise, the game is the fourth in the Jedi Knight series of games, many of which were PC exclusives, and is a direct sequel to Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast. As a nice little link to Jedi Outcast, Kyle Katarn, who was the main character in that game, is your Jedi Master, and he will accompany you on a number of the missions. The main story focuses on a group called the Disciples of Ragnos. This Sith-inspired cult seems to be travelling the galaxy and using a staff to absorb Force energy for some clearly evil means. Other characters play pivotal roles, including Luke Skywalker and Roth, another Jedi apprentice who you befriend at the very start of the game. I won't go too much into the spoilers, but the game takes you from planet to planet, including a whole host of destinations that have been seen throughout the original trilogy, as well as a whole host of original locations and locations seen in Star Wars comic books and expanded universe media. So what did people think of this game when it was first released at the time? Well, on release this game came out exclusively on the PC and Xbox. It was noted that consistently across all sources, the PC version of the game got a higher score, not usually by a great deal though. Overall though, we're going to be focusing on the Xbox version because that is the version I'm reviewing and the version I played most back when it was first released. Scores were generally favourable, however they did range quite a bit, and this isn't too surprising, which we'll talk about in a minute. Scores tended to range from 60% all the way up to 82%, but the majority of the scores were in the high 70s to low 80s. So why am I thinking it's quite understandable that the scores would range? Well, first of all, Star Wars isn't for everybody, and how much you're going to enjoy aspects of this game will depend on how much you love Star Wars. I think even more importantly, how much you love Star Wars and the characters and content of the game will influence how much you're willing to overlook some of the game's flaws, which we will get to soon. One feature that many of the critics loved was the online mode, Xbox Live being used for one of the first times, allowing you along with a number of friends or just random other people online to duel against each other. The storyline rightfully received a lot of praise, and the fact that right from the beginning your character could use a lightsaber, access the Force, and really feel like they were part of the Star Wars universe was something fans and critics were very fond of. Surprisingly enough, considering how decent the scores were for most reviews, I couldn't find a great deal of other areas that people would consistently praise. Instead, the criticisms were the things that were picked up on most. A lot of people spoke about the graphics themselves, feeling that they were quite dated by what the Xbox had already proven it could do at the time. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but it was certainly a theme that a lot of people picked up on. But it wasn't the biggest. The biggest issue that everyone had were the controls. Many cited that when you ran into battle, you found yourself furiously flicking through menu screens, trying to access different Force abilities or different weapons to use. And also that the lightsaber combat controls and targeting themselves were clunky at best and downright oppositional to you at worst. I think the graphics were something that most people would have been able to overlook, but the controls, I think it's a fair observation to make, and it may be the one thing that really impacts on this game not being the greatest Star Wars game ever made that we spoke about earlier. But that was all talking about when the game was first released. What about now? How does it stand up to modern scrutiny? Has it seasoned and fermented like a fine wine, or has it just gone stale? Well, coming at it from a retro lens, the graphics are a nothing to me. There is no issue with them. Quite frankly, when you're looking back at a game this far back, it's very hard to really place it for the graphics at the time. The graphics still are accessible and work absolutely fine, so I have no problem with them. In fact, the cutscenes I found really enjoyable and very well done. There was a couple of bits I had issue with, like the fact that the X-Wings only ever had one wing on each side rather than the X. But other than that, the graphics were generally very good and engaging for me. And while no one seemed to be mentioning the audio when I looked at reviews for the game, I have to comment, the audio in this is really good. The music in it is fantastic. There's a lot of our well-established and well-known Star Wars tracks, and a lot of original music that very clearly fits the universe that you would just accept as real Star Wars music. The commentary and audio in the game, the sound of the lightsabers, the talking, the voice acting, it's all pretty good, so there's no problems there. But my god, those controls, oh, right from the beginning, you are fighting against them. Good controls in a game should just flow naturally. You shouldn't even really be thinking about them. In this, it's a constant challenge to fight against those controls. And it really got in the way. I take this game in periods of time before I come away from it a little bit because I'm struggling with the controls so much. When I do get back into it, it's with okay, here we go again. Looking back on it, I stand firm with what I said. Storyline wise, level design wise, content wise, this game had the potential to be the best Star Wars game ever. I am creating my own character and the options within that were brilliant. I have access to using gun turrets, speeder bikes, I'm riding a tauntaun. All these planets I'm visiting, everything about it made it feel like an absolutely immersive and original Star Wars experience. Each level is completely different and has different aims and objectives that stop them being too samey. The force powers within the game are brilliant and really fun to learn and use, and because you can constantly expand and evolve your options, it never gets boring. A remake of this with better controls would genuinely have the chance to create the greatest Star Wars game ever made, but unfortunately, that's not what this is. I will say, the longer you play the game, you do get a little bit more used to the controls. And overall, if you're a Star Wars fan, like I said, you're going to be willing to overlook the controls and just focus on how much fun it is to be in this universe, creating your own character, adapting your force abilities, and absolutely kicking ass with a lightsaber. As those who've seen my Resident Evil content will know, I'm not really a big advocate of making remakes of games, but in this situation, I think it's crying out for it. Overall, Star Wars Jedi Knight Jedi Academy is a really good Star Wars game with really bad controls. The best I can give it is a 7.5 out of 10, but I think if you're not a Star Wars fan, that could drop as low as 6.5. But for me, it's still worthy of that score. But then that's me saying it as a huge Star Wars fan. What did you think? If you played this game, comment below, let me know. And until next time, take the high ground.